Hello, everyone. We're back with another episode of I Builder 4am. And here together with me, I have some very smart people that are going to help us understand a little bit more about rollups and rollup guarantees. I have from Cartesi Gabriel co-hosting with me, and our guests here are Bartek and Luca from L2BEAT. How's everyone?
Hey, guys.
Yeah,
Hello.
thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for coming. So I had this first question that I want to start our conversation with, and it's recently there has been this whole reevaluation, recategorization from L2BEAT on rollups as a whole. Why did L2BEAT raise the bar for rollups?
Thanks for this question. I think this is extremely timely, and I'm gonna take this one because I feel like being a founder of L2BEAT, I take most of the blame for this one. But I guess I see L2BEAT as a community effort to make projects accountable, if you like, and we tend to grow with the community, right? The risk framework that we've developed, which was originally based on Vitalic's proposal from many years ago, and that was also consulted with us. We kind of added a lot of necessary details because the proposal was very broad. And at that time, if I remember correctly, we had like maybe few systems that we were listening at the time. And interestingly enough, all of them had proof systems, right? So we had a few ZK rollups, we had the Optimism, the first version, we had the Arbitrum, and we kind of like thought that teams will be only improving from that sort of like starting point. Turned out that a few months later, because of problems that we can discuss in details, Optimism has removed the proof system with the view that they will like upgrade it, and they asked us to wait a few months for the upgrade, but that turned into a few years, and in the meantime we had an explosion of rollups, if you like, and not even dozens, probably hundreds of different teams launching what they call the rollup, but upon a closer inspection, it was almost like a side chain, right? It was a system which was literally secured by often an EOA or a very small internal multisig. And again, we thought for a while that it was just a passing phase. However, that was not the case, right? Like literally we saw more and more of these systems. Also, probably because rollup as a service providers made it extremely easy and cheap, to launch new rollups. And then finally, we decided that, well, we have to go back to the basics, like, ask ourselves a question like why we wanted to have rollups in the first place, and what does it even mean, to like derive the security from Ethereum, right? And finally, we decided that the only way, to make everybody accountable is to essentially raise the bar, right? It's to say, hey, look, if you want to be called a rollup, you do need to have a proof system. Without the proof system, it's like, you're essentially secured by the multisig, and then we're going to wait for years, for the proof system to appear. And also, if you want to be called a Validium or Optimium, meaning the system that doesn't really post the data to Ethereum, make sure that you're actually posting the data to something which gives users, like some minimum security guarantees, right? It cannot be just one server. It cannot be attested by EOA, which is often the case, or not attested by anyone, really. So the system is vulnerable to data availability attacks. And I think, frankly, like personally, that was always the intention from day one, but it wasn't like properly articulated. So yeah, that's like the genesis of the story. We gave projects 6 months to adjust when the change was announced in Bangkok during DEF CON. And a few projects did adjust. The vast majority of projects, for all sorts of reasons, did not. So this is where we are today.
Something that came to my mind listening to your reply to that is, do you think other recategorizations are bound to happen in the future?
Like I say, we're closely monitoring the market, and we know that we need to be flexible, and we know that the market's going to evolve in ways that we can't really predict, right? So who knows? Maybe in the future, the market's going to change. Maybe the focus will be more on the app chains, which we can discuss later, and maybe that, for example, would necessitate, some extra changes to the framework. We're gonna see, right? Like I say, we are here to serve the community and not to be like super rigid and not very useful to anyone.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and I think it's quite important that we try to have like stricter standards, right? I think we got a bit too lazy, and especially in a rollup centric roadmap, right? So the follow-up question is that we have these the risk framework, and there is stage 2, which is seen as like the huge milestone, right? And the question is there like nuances between the stage 2 rollups? Like if you have rollup A and B and they're both stage 2, are there like nuances, differences that we should be worried about? Caveats and so on.
There are. One of the biggest misconceptions around the stages framework is that it talks about security necessarily. Like that's something that is stage 2 is more secure than something that is stage 1 or stage 0. This is not true necessarily. It can be true. Like we hope that it is true, but it couldn't be. And the reason is that stages are a measure of decentralization and not security. You could have a system that is very decentralized. It is possible today to launch, if you want to, you take one of the stacks and you can just remove all the permissions and deploy something that is permissionless, for example, and be stage 2. That's very possible, but it doesn't mean that that system is secure. Like there is a reason why the projects that we have today are at stage 1. And not stage 2. Like they're not confident that the smart contracts or the proof systems specifically are like solid enough to support a project like with a lot of TVS and no possibility to recover from bugs, right? Stages is a measure of security if projects are like careful enough to decentralize only when they're secure enough, right? But there could be, again, that since it is becoming easier to launch these rollups, we will see some stage 2 projects that are not very secure. One example could be like the Honeypot that you released, right? You deployed the system exactly to test to test it. So since this is potentially misleading, we were also thinking about adding a maybe orthogonal dimension, which talks more specifically about security, which discusses maybe stuff like audits, formal verification. We had this idea for a very long time about a notification factor that tells you how long the contracts have been live without bugs. And the problem is, it is very complicated to measure security in a way. I did an exploration a while ago on audits because there were some debates between Arbitrum and Optimism regarding their proof system, each one of them saying that the other one was not audited or something. So I spent a lot of time reading those audits, and it turns out that like just having an audit, it doesn't tell you much, because it could be that with an audit, you just cover one part of the system, then you modify this part and you audit the other part. So like as a whole, everything is audited, but at different times, and some other components were modified. In the meantime, also these audits sometimes are not very clear about what is the scope of the audit. And a lot of other times, if there are problems, like fixes needed by those audits, the fixes are not audited. right? So should we like count these cases are, you know, as a system that is audited or not? There was a very big exploit very recently on a very big project because of a bug introduced on a fix after an audit, right? So this is something that can happen. So
that's hilarious.
we're trying to also, you know, create this other dimension that would more explicitly talk about security. But again, if projects themselves are careful enough, there is a correlation between decentralization and security potentially.
I mean, it's really nice that you touched on this point of decentralization and security as a discussion, because I wanted to ask to you about the recent, not so recent, it's been a few months already. Vitalic shared this post talking about a quorum of ZK, TE, and fraud proofs to actually being a path for rollups finalization, right? And I wanted to know, how does this fit into this landscape of, and even in this theory and philosophy idea of having an evaluation of security as well, besides just decentralization?
Yeah, so having multiproofs would probably be one of the dimensions or criteria of this potentially orthogonal dimension, right? And this is also one of the main reasons why these stage 1 projects haven't moved to stage 2 yet. All of them are building some type of, you know, independent proof system, which is very difficult because just building one, we know that it takes a ton of time. We have, you know, some projects that are kind of doing proofs as a service of sorts, like, you know, SP1, RISC-0. There are these sorts of ZK VMs that more or less you can just plug into your system, which could help in some ways. They're not very mature. There have been bugs in the systems also very recently. But yeah, so the idea that Vitalic had is, or like in general projects have, is to use multiproofs. There is this idea of combining ZK proofs with fraud proofs for a very specific reason, which is that the main worry about ZK are soundness bugs, like bugs that can cause a safety failure, because it could be that the circuit is under constraint and you can forge proofs about any statement, which is arguably worse than completeness bug. If you have a completeness bug, your proof system would just freeze. And if the system is frozen, you could have some emergency procedure to fix the bug. While if you have a soundness bug which causes a safety failure, funds could be compromised immediately, right? So the idea is that since soundness bugs are more likely than completeness bugs, and this has been, you know, in practice measured, there are some reports showing that 90% plus of bugs in ZK are bugs due to under constrained circuits. The idea is, if you use ZK in a fraud-proof model, in a way, you would turn a soundness bug in liveness failure instead of a safety failure. Because if you can disprove a statement because you can prove anything, like as long as you can prove something, you disprove the statement, this would turn into a liveness failure, right? So now, if you can imagine a 2 out of 3 proof system with ZK at TE and this sort of ZK fraud proofs, the only way to compromise the system is either like the TE is compromised, and this is also like a real concern. There are attacks that involve the attacks on TEs are just a function of funds, of money that the attacker is willing to spend. There are attacks known for less than $100K, for example, on TEs. So if the TE is compromised, the only way to get a safety failure would be to have a soundness failure in the ZK that is used not optimistically, like pessimistically, and a completeness failure on the other one that is used as a fraud proof, because one just says just proves an invalid state root, and the other one is frozen because there is a completeness bug. And this combination is the one that is thought to be the most unlikely one in practice.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so what you said about the TE really worried me, you know, like you can attack by only 100K. That is way too cheap, right?
Yeah, there are some workarounds, like usually what is recommended is to use at least 2 TEs, 2 different TEs, in a 2 out of 2 setup, or maybe 3 even. These attacks that are known are attacks that can extract the attestation key, but destroy all the data that is inside at the same time. So there are some techniques where you can maybe generate like the private key or the attestation key inside the TE, so that there are some kind of workarounds being studied, but still, I don't think we should rely on TEs. But like in L2BEAT, in our frameworks, for example, we don't consider TEs as a valid proof system.
Yeah, and in this setup, you know, where it is, you have like all these redundancies, TE being one of the pillars of redundancy, even that you feel that it's not good enough.
All proof systems are like very complicated.
Yeah.
So yeah, you want to have redundancy, and hopefully this redundancy, like hopefully there are no correlation between bugs in different systems. And this also is a concern because, for example, you could have 2 different ZK VMs that are built with Plunky 3, and there has been a recently a bug in Plunky 3 itself that affected multiple ZK VMs, right? So, and these systems are again extremely complicated. So,
yeah.
See.
Yeah, because, you know, this leads us into, you know, the next question, which is, we have already answered it, which is about multi-proofs. You know, we're creating all these redundancies because these systems, they do protect a lot of money, right? So we need to have like very high threshold of security. But one issue we think, you know, when we see the scenario is that, as you said, these proof systems are very complicated, you know, and very expensive to create and to develop, and they take time. And you have all these different teams which are competitors, right? And they are all each implementing their own system. But if we want to have a future with multi-proofs, it would be better if they could collaborate, you know, and share one another's proof systems, but they are competitors. So, you know, what is the path? What do you see as the path to multi-proofers in this landscape?
So I think maybe the answer might actually depend on whether you mean ZK proving systems, different ZK proving systems, and fraud proof systems. So maybe I'll start with the my personal take, which you might disagree about the different fraud proof systems. We had this conversation before the podcast, like if arguably, let's say, Dave, proof system is better than Bolt, why? What's the point of Arbitrum using Bolt if you can like objectively argue that is inferior? So, so I guess I'm not really sure if this is a case of a redundancy in case of a fraud-proof systems, because I see them more of a, you know, crypto economic engine games, if you like, and they. To me, like the proof system from Optimism, Cartesi, and Arbitrum, like the 3 most known ones to the community, they all sit slightly. They all take like, you know, slightly different trade-offs, you know, in the trade-off space, and maybe different systems actually require different trade-offs. I'm not really sure. At the moment, we have this strange situation, which is, by the way, one of the interesting reasons why there's so few systems categorized as rollups and validiums on L2BEAT, and that is that if you build on Orbit stack, you're apparently not encouraged to use Bolt because of the high requirements, you know, high bond requirements. But at the same time, if you use the old proof system, like this classic, right, Arbitrum, then you're very likely to use a whitelist, which, you know, we don't allow for stage 1 systems, for example, right? So So this is a concern for sure. And you might think that, well, whoever's the best, should like take the whole space, right? But then again, maybe it's a matter of like reputation of a particular project and whatnot. If say like, Arbitrum has been, I don't know, I think Arbitrum particularly, they like very attached to the proof system. Optimism, not so much. They probably will very likely eventually move out, maybe from fraud proofs to ZK proofs, and they don't care, if you like. That might be a different case for Arbitrum. It might be a different case for you guys because my understanding is that you're like looking for a different niche, right? And like I said before, we don't know which way the market will go. The market was just one certain thing about the market. It will surprise us, right? And for ZK, it's clear that what Luca has said before, that we really want to make sure that we've got multiple proving systems based on ideally different math, different VM, different everything, because then the probability of the soundness bug happening at the same time in two different proof systems is clearly low, or even non-existent. So now there's a question like, how do we even finance that, right? And is the proof system a public good? And if so, what is the founding model? This is an open question to almost everyone, including ourselves, right? I mean, we're open public good company, so we keep asking ourselves this question over and over. What is a sustainable financial future for companies like L2BEAT, and what would be the sustainable financial future for someone doing advanced research, which will result in having, a potentially new, better proof system, right? Who's going to actually pay for that if you want to release it as an open source. So.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a bit of like a tragedy of the commons in a way, right? Mm-hmm. But it is a problem with public funding in general. But I'll just want to highlight what you said because it's quite interesting. I hadn't thought of it this way, right? Because of course, redundancy only makes sense if all the pillars, holding up your system are all good, right? Like if you add another one just for redundancy, but it is worse, you're just making the system more brittle. You're not adding more robustness to it. And it is, this question, shouldn't you just use the best fraud-proof system available? Like why would you want to kind of have this redundancy if one's clearly better than the other? Whereas in ZK, you kind of said that you feel that the redundancy is more important, perhaps because it is there are more flavors of it. I don't know. Could you expand on that?
I basically meant, well, I mean, flavor, I'm not really sure if, this is how I personally think about it. Lucas has just mentioned about the Plonky 3, bug that could potentially destroy every single proof system based on Plonky 3. I see it as more of a multi-client type of issue that, Ethereum do want to have this redundancy. And obviously, this is with a tremendous cost of developing and maintaining all these different client architectures, right? Other blockchains, they seem to be going, much cheaper and smoother path of having just one, hardened client, and if it breaks, then the blockchain stops, for some hours or maybe some days, experiences liveness failure, and then you just say, hey, look, we were saying all along there was just alpha, like if you use the blockchain that will not be named, just remember it's alpha infrastructure, right? So
yeah, but I see like two different things here. Like one is protecting from bugs. If you just want like bugs in the implementation, right? You want to have a multi-proof system so that you can see that there is a mismatch, for example, in the state proof being proven. And the other one is what if the protocol itself, like in this case, the like challenge protocol is better, like one proof system is better than the other, right? So in this case, if this one is just better, you should probably just use the other one, right? But if your concern is detecting bugs, then you should have two different implementations that ideally would do the same thing. if they are both correct, but diverge if a bug is present in one of them.
I mean, I keep thinking like this would only be valid still kind of for ZK, right? Because if you're thinking about fraud proofs and someone is suffering a delay attack from one side and you're expecting the response from both to actually take a decision, then you're still vulnerable to the delay attack as the worst case. Like you're always picking the worst case scenario, right? So you're kind of stuck in there anyway. One thing that you mentioned about multi-proofers in general and stage 2 in general is that stage 2 measures decentralization. And I think the first time I heard about multi-proofers, personally, it was around a year ago or so. And the idea appealed to me so much as being some sort of pillar for security. And I had in the back of my mind that this increased security, this enhanced security could be the thing that takes us beyond stage 2, you know. But as you mentioned, stage 2 is about decentralization, not security. So is there a future that we can see something going beyond stage 2? Like, what's the extra mile, right?
So there have been some people discussing that stage 2 might not be enough because of different reasons. One of them is, for example, that in stage 2 we still allow projects to upgrade with a delay, right? And this delay is a minimum of 30 days, or like the exit window that this delay will provide is at minimum 30 days, right? And when we talk about exit windows, one of the implicit assumptions that we make, which maybe should be more explicit, is that you can exit with your funds immediately, right? So if there is, let's say, a malicious upgrade that is being scheduled in a time lock, you can, maybe you're on vacation, maybe you're offline for whatever reason. If you come online within these 30 days, you're good to go. You're safe you can exit the system. The thing is that a lot of applications are delayed themselves. You could have, for example, another time lock on the L2 that is a vesting contract, or implements a cliff of some tokens, right? And if this cliff is 2 months, but the exit window is 30 days, then you cannot exit. Then you're not safe. So stage 2 in this case doesn't cover all the cases. And also another concern is, if the L2 is not EVM equivalent, has some very specific features that you cannot just bridge to L1, then you lose them forever. Even if you have this exit window, and you try during this exit window to bridge as much of the state as possible to L1, it could be that some of the state depends on some features that are not present on L1. It could be some precompiles, it could be a different VM. So there is this concern. But the reason why we wanted to have this exit window and not just immutable rollups is that L1 upgrades. And since L1 changes, it's kind of unreasonable in a way to expect that no L2 would upgrade, right? If L1, that is the most costified and slow layer, moves, then also all the L2s that are more experimental, at least initially, would also be expected to upgrade, right? So a lot of the system are EVM equivalent, or just try to be EVM equivalent, plus maybe something else. And if L1 supports a new feature, also these projects would like to support that. One example is this recent 7702 that adds some features regarding account obstruction. It took some time for the L2s to support it. Some projects still don't have it. And to do this, there is no other way to upgrade, if you don't have some governance system. But if you can upgrade, then you can upgrade arbitrarily, which is a problem, right? So there are some ideas on how to fix this. One of them is this native rollups proposal that would just solve it for EVM equivalent rollups. All the other ones would still, decide, have to decide whether they want to be immutable or support some governance system. For those that want to be EVM equivalent, maybe there is a way to try to reuse the L1 EVM directly, so that if they just want to be EVM equivalent, if L1 upgrades, also the L2 would upgrade at the same time. And also another thing that I wanted to mention is, in my opinion, upgradability is a bit overrated for stage 2. In my opinion, even if a project is EVM equivalent and they just decide to deploy with the current feature something that is immutable and never upgrades, is not that bad, to be honest. So I invite some projects to try this, slice of the space.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and I mean, we're taking notes, like when we ask what can projects do to go like the extra mile, we also want to know like what we can do to go this same extra mile. And let me pick a topic that you mentioned, which is native rollups. We have this like native and based rollups. And first, could you like give an overview of what is a native or a base or a native and base rollup? And then we can continue the conversation on this topic.
Yeah, so native and based are concepts that try to explain or like define things that L2s could do to get closer to L1. Based is about sequencing, and the idea is you don't need to have your own sequencing rules or like sequencing layer. In a way, you could just reuse what L1 does, which is the L1 proposer. We already have a very like decentralized set of proposers. Maybe builders, no, like for sure builders are not as decentralized. We have very few of them, but like for example, if L1 would implement a measure to provide more censorship resistance, like fossil, which is considered for the next hard fork, the L2 would also have that automatically, right? Without any additional like delays, for example, because if you want to have first transactions in a L2 today with a sequencing mechanism that is separate from L1, you need these delays. We know that Arbitrum has this 24 hours delay. Optimism is 12 hours. And like there are technical reasons why this is the case. And the only way to reduce this first transaction delay to something that is the same as L1 is if you're based, for example. And then the superpower that a base rollup would unlock is that if the L1 proposer is the one both sequencing the L1 and the L2 block at the same time, you could have synchronous composability. They have a lock in both of the states, so this would allow projects to have what they call super transactions or like cross-chain calls between L1 and L2 that are synchronous and potentially atomic if we get to real-time proofs, or if there is some other mechanism that provides atomicity, like the AG layer or similar. So based is about sequencing, native is about proving. So all these projects that want to be EVM equivalent, they need to re-implement a lot of things. They add a lot of complexity. At least the OG projects spent the most of their time just building the proof system, while they could focus on other stuff like maybe their ecosystem, application, and whatnot, right? Like Base, for example, is something like a project that doesn't really focus on the proof system that much because someone else has done it for them, right? The OP stack already provides a proof system or like the full stack, so they can focus on applications, for example, which is pretty good. So the idea is instead of trying to re-implement the EVM or like everything from scratch, like for example, Linea is building circuits for all the opcodes, everything to be as EVM equivalent as possible. you could just potentially reuse the implementation of L1, right? So now, if your EVM equivalent or like native, and you're also based, you could have a system that is very simple from the like code perspective. Potentially could be just a few lines of code in a smart contract where you just call this execute precompile that does the state transition function, and there's nothing that adds complexity to sequencing, because it's just a function that is open to everyone, which is potentially filled by the L1 proposer itself. So now it becomes a little bit, if you think about it, it becomes more similar to sharding. It would be something very, very close to the original proposal of sharding, much more mature in my opinion. But yeah, like now there are a lot of parallels. There have been conversations, like even yesterday I had some conversation with Anoma, for example. They're also building sharding, and everyone is like looking at this. Some people are having PTSD from the old sharding proposals, but yeah.
Yeah, and and this kind of leads to a kind of like uncomfortable feeling. Like suppose you're on like a project that does EVM, and then you have these like native features that get added to layer 1, and then you see like based, and at some point like what is the difference? Like it's just a couple lines of code. Like if we open L2BEAT and see the whole list there, what becomes the difference between all these projects, and does that even make sense at this point where you have like both native plus base rollup?
I'm almost certainly confident that when you open L2BEAT in, say, 3 years' time, you're very likely to see a very different list of projects.
Sure.
Kind of similarly to what we've experienced years ago with CoinMarketCap. It's kind of funny, when you use this time machine and actually look at what was the top blockchain and top narrative 5 years ago, let's say. And similarly, if you guys remember DeFi Summer, who would have thought that literally the only project from that year today would be Aave, right? All those food copies and whatnot, they all disappeared. And I think it shows a larger trend that, every single cycle requires a certain narrative. We certainly have experienced like a cycle that was filled with a rollup narrative for good and for bad. I think the next cycle we're going to actually see the real market and the real product market fit. That's my personal take here. And we're going to see, which narrative is going to actually end up being very useful. Is it like this analogy that rollups are like commercial banks, and the L1 like a settlement layer is like a central bank, and then yes, we do need a lot of different commercial banks for lots of reasons, not just because they scale better horizontally, and we certainly wouldn't want one central national bank to have everybody's accounts, but also they could compete. They could try to create their own I don't know, like customer strategy and whatnot, the ecosystem. I personally kind of like this idea, maybe you, in that future, you should never like leave a rollup, right? You should park your funds in an ecosystem that you like, which will give you access to DeFi, to, I don't know, payment system, to yield and whatnot. I mean, at the end of the day, we don't need all that much, right? But still, we have a lot of similar systems. But the other spectrum would be the app chains, right? Like, something very specific that will be built as a rollup for all sorts of reasons, like having an exclusive access to the mempool could be one, for example, right? So that, people do have a PTSD after CryptoKitties. They tried to build all sorts of applications that were like literally made useless because someone launched NFT project on Ethereum, and that made people realize, hey, well, look, if I don't have my unique like lane, right, that I control, then maybe this is a problem, right? For like real-time applications, for exchanges, for games, for all sorts of things. And I think we might see actually the beginning of it, right? So I don't know what the future is going to hold, but I certainly see a lot of projects disappear from the current list as they don't seem to serve much of a purpose today because they're all alike. But at the same time, we might actually see some very novel, rollups, and the design space is huge, obviously, right? And this is good. I mean, like we like our space because it's transparent, but also it's permissionless in the sense that anyone can build anything really, and bad things will be built, but and useless, but also good things will be built and very useful.
Whoops. I love that you mentioned CryptoKitties, because it's specifically the use case I always mention on all of my presentations whenever I'm introducing Cartesi to someone to explain why app specific is relevant, why app specific is important, right? It's a great example. It works so well. And something that you mentioned about like the narratives that come and go, and how the cycles work and how the cycles behave, right? We are seeing the Kraken, Uniswap, Robinhood launching their L2s, and as you mentioned, it's impossible to see the future. But is it something that makes sense to have all these use case specific L2s more than so the general purpose L2s, or is there space for everything? What is the next steps that you see for rollups as a whole?
So I kind of gave my personal take in a way, right? But let's hear maybe Luca. Maybe he's gonna get a different take or like other nuance to the discussion.
I think, as Bartek said, it's nice that everyone can experiment and can have. But yeah, I mean, the concern remains, right? I think also these projects themselves are facing this reality. They're kind of also questioning themselves a little bit, trying to find their own niche in a way. We have some projects contacting us with like new features that they want. Like right now they're AVM equivalent, but they would like to add something to differentiate themselves quite a bit. But yeah, like I feel like there is sort of this crisis also when you think about L1 scaling. The recent efforts to really scale L1. Like if all the big economic activity goes to L1, then it might be a bigger concern. The cool thing is, again, you can experiment. One of the very cool projects that have been announced recently were, for example, Previdiums from zkSync, from Matter Labs, where you have those chains that with unavailable data in a way, where they don't expose the data, the state is not available. So for us, it would not be like a proper L2, it would be like in the other tab and whatnot. But it's still like a very interesting use case, because like while you still depend from the operators, like for example, Deutsche Bank will likely deploy one of those systems. You still get some guarantees from zk. Like for example, that if the state transition function is known, that they cannot just increase balances, even if you cannot see them. Even if you don't know the transfers on the systems, you still have the guarantees that they cannot do anything weird unless they do something very explicit, like an upgrade. But in that case, you would see it on chain. So you have like a footprint of something broke has happened, right? So, like there are ways in which these projects can experiment, which I think is extremely cool. If you don't want to experiment that much, I still think there is a space for you, in the sense of you can create your sort of culture, there is this very good article by Vitalic that talks about cultural decentralization or like diversity, which is very cool. Like even though you're maybe identical, technically speaking, to something else, you could create your own ecosystem that is for some reason unique from a culture perspective.
Yeah, I really love this this point about different cultures, and I think as we move more and more like digital, I think we kind of, I don't know, I think sometimes I feel we lack this, like as we're moving more and more digital. Well, now that we have already touched on the points of like use case specific and also like app specific, like really going through the granularities until you reach the point where the rollup is just one application. It seems that the current risk framework can't quite capture app-specific rollups in some ways, and you also gave other examples of other like projects and approaches which are also quite valuable, but they don't fit exactly inside the risk rosette. So the question is, should we see more frameworks for these other things, if they become a thing eventually? And the follow-up is, can we do anything to help you with these frameworks?
It's a very good question because, we're like, I think we came at the full circle in a way because the space started with app chains. General purpose rollups were super hard to be built. And if you look at the history of rollups, the first few rollups were all app chains, mostly exchanges, but also payment systems. And now that we kind of know how to build general purpose rollups, people are starting to experiment again with app chains. And like I said at the beginning, we will evolve with the space, right? So who knows? Maybe at the end of the day, we will need, like significant changes to the framework. But at the moment, we kind of look at the framework not just as a simple measure of decentralization, but also we view it through the lens of a certain user expectations and guarantees, mostly around liveness and safety of users' funds, right? So the intuition here was always that if you're like high up in this, stage system, the operators should not be able to steal your funds, and they should not be able to freeze your funds, right? And I personally always had this, like a mental model of a casino where I like, deposit my funds, something happens, and then I go into a coma. I wake up a few years later, my backpack is full of casino chips, right? I go to redeem them, but casino is just no longer there, right? It's completely demolished. And we're like, what do I do? Like these chips are worthless, but what happened with my money, right? Clearly I deposited my money. Maybe even I won something in this casino. However, unfortunately, I couldn't exit very quickly. I experienced, a personal liveness failure of sorts, right? By going to the coma. So that was my original mental model. Now, this is not as easy, obviously, with the real systems for all sorts of reasons. However, I think that even for app chains, there should be certain user guarantees, right? Around liveness and safety. You don't want operator to disappear and then the system would stop with, whatever loss you will be experiencing, even if it's not financial. Maybe maybe you had some NFTs, maybe there was some state, right, that is kind of frozen because you can't really progress that state, and also like problems around the safety. But like I say, for app chains, they would probably will have to be kind of app chain specific, if you like, right? And we had, these conversations around the recent app chains. We spent a lot of time discussing that with a project called Quinto that introduced what they call a KYC chain. We had a lot of discussions even with you guys, with your Honeypot, where arguably you can't really exit your funds because you can only deposit. So clearly there's no guarantee. Actually, there's a guarantee that you will not be able to exit your funds if the system is sound, which kind of runs contrary to what I just said. However, the system can't cheat, right? If it promises you that you can't withdraw, that you won't be able to withdraw. So it's like a upside down type of situation, and I think we're like getting into the crux of the problem, right? That the higher you up in the stage system, the operator cannot break promises, if you like, right? Yes. And now we're back to like, what is the original promise? Is the promise that you can deposit and then withdraw, or maybe there's some other kind of promise, right? And that promise would have to be defined potentially individually for each app chain, and that might not be like super easy, right? But let's see some other examples, and I think that eventually we'll come with a good framework for that. That's my hope.
Yeah. Oh, perfect.
So like specifically on this, like we had some ideas in the past. For example, introduce something like stages for actions, right? So you would have app specific chain where there would be like a purpose defined, like a set of actions that these app chains would want to guarantee. And then we would kind of define like decentralization or like operator risk around these actions. And these actions, as Bartek said, could be custom based on the system. But then, it's also open questions like which actions are specifically, like with Kinto, we had the problem, okay, we want to cover tokens, but like whole tokens, like any type of token, or maybe just ETH, or maybe just the gas token, because different tokens, for example, could use different bridges, and different bridges could have their own security, right? So Kinto is a bit of a special case. It's also kind of the first one that we kind of analyzed. It's not, we call it app specific in a way, but it's also not really app specific because it's a orbit with like general purpose smart contracts, even though deployments are disabled. Once we'll see, more like uncontroversially app specific chains, I think there will be a very interesting conversation around what is the purpose of this chain.
Nice, yeah, because I like this view of like the casino, like what can the operator do, and like the way I usually thought about this is that ideally we would all be in layer 1, right? And all the smart contracts in there have all these guarantees that the layer 1 provides, but a smart contract can still steal your funds, like nothing's keeping you from coding a smart contract that is itself malicious. The layer 1 only guarantees that it's going to execute exactly as written. And as I was like expanding this to layer 2s, like we want one app specific layer 2 to behave exactly the same as layer 1 smart contract, with a few odd things like delay to execute messages and so on. So I kind of always approached the risk as being that, like how close are we to being almost a layer 1 smart contract?
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with this take. I kind of always thought that the proper way of seeing rollups is like the off-chain smart contract systems, if you like, that we build it as a to provide more compute space, so for more scaling, right? And if L1 could scale indefinitely, then we probably wouldn't need L2s so much. But even with L1 scaling, I mean, my personal belief is that eventually, that's never going to be enough, right? Because it will be taken by our bots and whatnot, and and if the chain is successful, there will be just like the block space will always be filled. So we have to scale both horizontally and vertically. So that's at least what the Ethereum community believes, right?
Yeah, we're totally aligned in that. Yeah. Okay, João, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't think so. I keep picturing with all the discussions, all the possibilities that we can have, like different, instead of just one pizza with all the 5 slices, we can have different flavors of pizza in the evaluation system, right? So that would be very nice. Different size, different numbers of slices, and different flavors.
I hope that we all agree that, you know, at the end of the day, everyone wants a green pizza, right? That's
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, perfect. You know, I think this is the end of all our topics that we wanted to cover. So I'll first, do you want to add anything, Bartek, or?
No, thank you very much, guys, for having us. I mean, like from our perspective, Cartesi has always been a team. We've always seen Cartesi as, you know, a team that is trying to push the boundaries, and you guys have been challenging us all the time, which we very much appreciate. And yeah, I mean, like, it's been a pleasure to talk to you guys.
Yeah, and we're immensely thankful to having you guys here, you know, because I mean, we talk, you know, we interact and everything, but I think also our community might not always be in sync with these very important topics that you cover, you know. And to our community, I hope it's quite clear, you know, how much we appreciate and we respect and we value L2BEAT. And how much we're also committed to following, you know, your directives. So whenever, like, you said that we challenge you, but, you know, when you raise the bar, you're also challenging us to do better and have stricter standards and so on. And we would also love to collaborate, you know, in several topics if, you know, you feel we can contribute in any way. I mean, we covered many topics here today. There's also the risk rosette for app specific, which, you know, if you feel we can collaborate, you know, we're here and we'd love to help.
Let's let your community build, you know, something more than a honeypot.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, we'll be more than happy to have this conversation for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very soon.
when Doom on production?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, we've covered this topic today, I think. Yeah, we had a meeting, you know, like, and we put it on the list. We had to like chop some features of the PRT, you know, like the system that is supporting Honeypot. We had to remove. It's actually just one feature, you know, just because it was easier to implement. And now we've added this back so we can run Doom on it. You know, it's just the revert, which is analogous to EVM revert.
Nice.
Yeah, we soon enough, we hope to have some version of alpha with not only Doom, but also some other very cool games that would work there.
Yeah, and also many other use cases beyond gaming. But I think gaming really showcases, you know, like
execution power.
Yeah, I mean, you see the graphics, you know, that's crazy to me. We can run the fraud proof.
Have you seen, Bartek, this
buffer
demo of Doom? Like, they prove everything about Doom, like frame by frame. Every frame a transaction, or like every action is a transaction? What is it?
Yes. So what happens is it is not multiplayer, you know. So you play by yourself against some challenge. And the client
is deterministic, right? So
yeah. And
the
keystrokes are not, you know, but the client records all the keystrokes, and then you can send all the keystrokes at once, and it proves that, you know,
sounds like tapping the cow, right? But with more complicated.
It sounds like what? Sorry.
Tapping the cow in
in Eclipse. There was this like game on Eclipse where they did like 3,000 TPS, but the only game was clicking, like tapping a cow.
Oh, okay. I see. Tapping.
Because the tapping is easier than like tapping
plain Doom,
you know, with keystrokes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're just recording the entire log, so then you can replay through the log to verify it was actually.
Yeah, and that verification. Yeah, verification includes the frame buffer, you know. That is what I think was like crazy. You know, we have like a really insane engineer that made that happen, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really funny. Everything started with a tweet, right? if Ethereum is the world computer, how come no one managed to run Doom on it yet? And then he just said, challenge.
Yeah, the other day, I think someone challenged him to put the Cartesian machine on DOS, Microsoft DOS.
Yeah.
And he did it. The Cartesian machine runs on Microsoft DOS.
It's running on the browser at this point, so we're just everywhere.
Yeah,
okay,
guys. So thank you very much. Yeah.
I think that was it. This was awesome. Thanks again for coming. Thank you so much for being here, and keep building and pioneering the world of Web3. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having us. Bye.
Bye.